Hey everyone, it's Joey from Joey's World Tour. Here's something I want to share with you. This is a Reddit post in our India News, posted by u/Hindu 4 years ago. It goes, on Jordan B. Peterson, History and Culture, JBP is a proponent of Christianity. He'll claim that the West succeeded because of its Judeo-Christian heritage and will suggest that people should adopt the same ideas world over. He'll claim that it contains knowledge accumulated over millennia, but that's almost certainly not what Christianity is. That religion evolved ever so little since it was established. The redactors may have incorporated some pagan knowledge, but who's to say that wasn't more akin to digestion, to use Rajiv Malhotra's terminology? Straying too far from the Bible would have been blasphemous. JBP will completely ignore that his Norwegian ancestors converted to Christianity only about a millennium ago, while simultaneously claiming that religion, rid Judeo-Christianity, is much more ancient than science, which is only about 500 years old, when speaking of religion as a source of knowledge. European rationalism is, in fact, pre-Christian Greek. JBP will hail the products of the Enlightenment, which fully co-opted capitalism, and claim their Judeo-Christian derivative, but he'll simultaneously treat Marxism and postmodernism as foreign, or at least not as part of the same tradition. Even the alt-right recognizes this, and so they'll never use JBP as more than a red pill agent. JBP claims to be a Nietzschean, I doubt it. Here he is speaking about God is dead, one of Nietzsche's most popular outrageous statements. For those who haven't read Nietzsche, here's our Nietzsche's take on God is dead. TLDR to Nietzsche, God is dead, is an event that occurred, that there will be ramifications, but that it is also an opportunity to reevaluate Western values. The video ends with JBP claiming the alternative is chaos, and that's much worse. This completely misses Nietzsche's favoring of the Dionysian conception and its juxtaposition with Christian morality, the former being life-affirming and the latter life-denying. From Walter Kaufmann's notes, the Dionysian is associated with superabundance. The Uber words Nietzsche uses include Überreichtum, Überfülle, Überschuss, Überfluss, Übervoll, and contrasted with a desire for revenge that is born of the sense of being underprivileged, what Nietzsche elsewhere calls resentment. Apollo had never been associated with resentment in Nietzsche's work, but now Christianity is associated with it more and more. Resentment is a concept loosely meaning resentment, that's the French word for it. Apollo and Dionysus are brothers in Greek mythology, and represent the order, chaos dualism in Greek philosophy. I've never found JBP speak of Nietzsche's criticisms of Christianity, one of Nietzsche's central themes. Ironically, it is JBP who has misread Nietzsche and is quoting him out of context. To me, it seems like JBP simply got spooked by God is dead, and that's been one of his primary motivators. The good Christian in JBP does not want God to die. The greatest advantage of polytheism, for an individual to posit his own ideal and to derive from it his own law, joys, and rights, that may well have been considered hitherto as the most outrageous human aberration and as idolatry itself. The few who dared as much always felt the need to apologize to themselves, usually by saying, not I, but a God through me. The wonderful art and gift of creating gods, polytheism, was the medium through which this impulse could discharge, purify, perfect, and ennoble itself. For originally it was a very undistinguished impulse related to stubbornness, disobedience, and envy. Hostility against this impulse to have an ideal of one's own was formerly the central law of all morality. There was only one norm, man, and every people thought that it possessed this one ultimate norm. But above and outside, in some distant overworld, one was permitted to behold a plurality of norms. One God was not considered a denial of another God, nor blasphemy against him. It was here that the luxury of individuals was first permitted. It was here that one first honored the rights of individuals. The invention of gods, heroes, and overmen of all kinds, as well as near men and undermen, dwarfs, fairies, centaurs, satyrs, demons, and devils, was the inestimable preliminary exercise for the justification of the egoism and sovereignty of the individual, the freedom that one conceded to a god in his relation to other gods, one eventually also granted to oneself in relation to laws, customs, and neighbors. Monotheism, on the other hand, this rigid consequence of the doctrine of one normal human type, the faith in one normal God beside whom there are only pseudo-gods, falsche Lügengötter, was perhaps the greatest danger that has yet confronted humanity. It threatened us with the premature stagnation that, as far as we can see, most other species have long reached, for all of them believe in one normal type, ein Normaltier, an ideal for their species, and they have translated the morality of Moors definitively into their own flesh and blood. In polytheism, the free-spiriting and many-spiriting of man obtained its first preliminary form, the strength to create for ourselves our own new eyes, and ever again new eyes that are even more our own. Hence, man alone among all the animals has no eternal horizons and perspectives. Friedrich Nietzsche in The Gay Science, aphorism 143. The good Christian will never understand the joys of not being Christian. JBP is a good counterweight to the extreme left, especially in the West, but he's dangerous for India. We should not make the mistake of importing him as is. I'll try to write about JBP later. But Nietzsche's characterization of the origin of various gods, Apollonian or Dionysian, is a standard kind of mistake also made by liberals in Christian societies, due to inheriting a certain framework. It leads to saying things like an elephant is a tall horse or a straw is a pencil with a hollow core, etc. Trying to understand a different concept as a variation of old concept by changing some parameter. Here's the framework, M. Say you are living inside some kind of virtual reality and you are convinced that as you go around exploring and living in this world, there are some ground rules for this virtual reality, almost like mathematical axioms, which define the creator's intentions of what is moral or right or good, etc. Two important questions arise in this framework. How are these principles of morality known to the players? Why do the players follow these rules? The standard answers: the creator communicates these commandments via prophets and revelation, appears himself, word becomes flesh, and also the players have an internal module, conscience, which gives them knowledge about the moral rules. Also, players have an intrinsic faculty called free will with which they either obey the good or do something evil. Okay, so after some time, many players rebel either by saying either the existing rules are corrupted, Protestants, creator of the game isn't good, antitheists, or creator does not even exist, atheist. But they are used to regulating their actions within this kind of moral framework. So they don't abandon the rules, nihilists, but make some changes. We must abandon current rules and return to original rules, fundamentalism, reformation, forming again in original image. These terms have a similar origin, or everyone can make their own axioms. This is what real freedom means, relativists. Nietzsche is doing the latter and gives this meaning of freedom, making one's rules, as motivation for multiple gods. Postmodernists also do this, and so Nietzsche is popular among them, even when they don't like the Superman direction he went in. Okay, here's another completely different framework. D. A patient has some disease which is causing a lot of pain, and a lot of the temporary reliefs, drinking alcohol, etc., which he tries in an ad hoc fashion, only make things worse. Now the patient sees a doctor, and the doctor gives a prescription based on inherited medical knowledge obtained by past doctors seeing thousands of patients and effects of various remedies for that disease. Now, the doctor's prescription is not a foundational rule. Firstly, it is more of a technology and also can vary a lot with the context. Secondly, the patient is not rule-bound to take it, though maybe the patient is a child and parents make him take it. The reason that the patient takes the medicine is that the patient was already trying to get rid of the disease. The only issue was lack of the necessary information. Now, if you take a Dharma book, whether it be the Sankhyakarika, Nyaya Sutras, Bhagavatam, they explicitly start with the goal of ending dukkha and reaching Ananda. They immediately note that temporary pleasures are inadequate for various reasons. Dharma has been defined in the Mahabharata as that which leads to the well-being of all jivas. Now, they don't see this goal of Ananda as a moral commandment, because jivas are constantly trying to get this every day in whatever manner they know about. Thus, the question of free will, relativism, nihilism doesn't arise. Instead, the problem is to figure out which actions are conducive to happiness, sukha, which is definition of dharma. Compare with Socrates. No one errs knowingly, all desire is for the good. Again, the notion of evil being caused by free will is absent. Instead, it is due to ignorance. Which brings us back to Nietzsche. The notion that Greeks or Indians were making up their own rules, and therefore making multiple gods, doesn't stand scrutiny. The existence of multiple gods is no more surprising than the existence of so many types of amazingly beautiful music. It is just a fact about the world we live in. There are a lot of common requirements required to approaching these devatas and installing their quality tattva in one's consciousness. Nietzsche is at least a bit right about the deity merging with the sadhak. Even when there are variations in rules, it is not a question of arbitrariness, but intrinsic to the devata, or practice. You might need somewhat different approaches for playing a tabla or a violin. User Avatar Level 3 Hindu Bale OP All-Time Top 500 Poster 4YR ago, whether it be the Sankhya Karika, Nyaya Sutras, Bhagavatam. It seems like these all were composed, written around the same time, and could very well reflect the dominant metaphysics of the time, the zeitgeist. Are there other examples of this being a standard metaphysics across all times? It seems like the opposition to suffering is anti-life. Suffering and overcoming suffering is what makes us stronger. How is the goal to end dukkha and reach ananda not confused with hedonistic pleasure? One reply, share user avatar level 4 TP23, all-time top 10, poster +1 for Yair, ago edited for Yair. Ago I am in the middle of some project work, so we'll try to write longer replies when that gets done. But briefly, metaphysics isn't a fruitful way of understanding what the various schools are doing. People face various symptoms, pain, fever, etc., and then try different remedies, go to a doctor, etc. Now, the doctor might have some background theory about the body, symptoms, etc., through which he thinks about the disease. Or it can be a field-tested set of practical methods, but the goal is practical, to get the patient out of the painful symptoms. An Ayurveda doctor might have different models than an allopathic doctor, etc., but the models are all primarily tools to cure the disease. In contrast, imagine a doctor who tells a patient you have to believe proposition K and then you will be cured. This is a strange thing to say, but this is the understanding of Christianity and related traditions. Romans were surprised when they first encountered this aspect. This has become cultural common sense, so much so that this is how people try to understand Dharma traditions. What do you believe in? Similar to the medical case, people are already running away from dukkha and towards sukha, whether it be now or 2000 BC. We don't need to assume any belief in theories, etc., whether it is eating tasty food, consuming the products of the entertainment industry, chasing after girls and boys, earning money to take care of family, trying to get power and status, etc. Kama, desires, is a crucial part of the human condition. But some ways of handling this are more sustainable than others. Firstly, artha, resources to fulfill desires, is scarce. So there are conflicts, interperson conflicts where different people fight due to conflicting desires, and more importantly, there are internal conflicts. Since your desires are multiple and fluctuating all the time, your goal of fulfilling one desire is constantly interfered with by the presence of other desires. So, a student wants to get a well-paying great job into a good college, but also likes playing video games on the net. This is exactly where Dharma comes in. What are the recommended actions and restraints that, when observed, lead to sustained well-being at both the personal level, some discipline leads to success and happiness, and social level, some coordination, treaties between groups, can give a better deal for everybody by generating trade, reducing violence, creating a better environment, and other social goods. My explanation of the Purusharthas is from this article by Shatavadani Ganesh, but this is well accepted by multiple sources, that the reason you follow Dharma is not masochism, curbing your impulsive desires because you don't like happiness, signaling that one is a follower of tradition, etc., but the value of Dharma is precisely that it helps you to prosper. In fact, most pujas are done with the goal of things like wealth/job/curing some disease, etc. Bhishma defines Dharma as that which improves the well-being of all sentient beings. So far so good, we know why hedonic pleasure-seeking is harmful. It promises impulsive happiness which only makes you miserable in the long run, and sometimes even in the short run, but one can't leave it due to addictoin. I believe even Peterson agrees on this point. But we can go a step further. Dharma, while good and necessary, is always a contingent thing. All these guidelines can reduce dukkha, but they are not an ultimate remedy. Regardless of best efforts, there will still be dukkha. This is where the Samkhya Karika, the oldest extant text of the foundational schools, starts. It mentions the problem of dukkha, and then that the usual remedies are not solutions at the root level, hence work only for some time. The diagnosis is that there is some confusion, nescience, which when fixed, leads the mind to be free from dukkha, or to express it positively, enter ananda. Note that dharma is still necessary step. In fact, sadhana and dharma have common practices like resisting impulses, developing concentration. There's more to write about this, and also how this whole set of teachings are lost in modern Hindu setting due to focus on emotionalism, relativism, etc. How one belief in Proposition X is different from Jnana traditions, which are more a kind of psychological epistemology similar to how CBT is used these days. Fascinating. I guess I was confused, maybe still am, because I interpreted any Dharma book explicitly starts with the goal of ending dukkha and reaching Ananda, as meaning people's objective is to end dukkha and achieve Ananda, which is very different from saying it's the book's objective. The former, I still think, would constitute a metaphysics, the latter would not. I still feel that such an objective could well have been the product of the zeitgeist. I'd started reading this copy of the Sankhya Karika, along with translation. https://archive.org/details/the Samkhya Karika Ofishvara Krishna Radhanath Fukan/page/n87, but dropped it halfway because I thought I needed a little more background first, but maybe I should just read the whole thing. It's not that long and I can always reread it. One reply, share user avatar level 6 TP23, all-time top 10, poster +1 4-wire ego, edited 4-wire. Ego, your interpretation is correct in that the Dharma schools see people as constantly trying to find remedies for dukkha. BTW, dukkha doesn't just mean suffering, it includes that, but it refers to something much more persistent, the constant sense of wanting to go somewhere else. Unsatisfactoriness is a better translation. This isn't metaphysics, it is a description diagnosis. Of course, one can agree or disagree with the description. In trying to solve the problem, one can build concepts, like Samkhya does with Prakriti or Purusha, 24 or so tattvas, 3 gunas. That could be a candidate for metaphysics. Regarding Samkhya Karika, I don't think what I am trying to say relies on the whole book. There are other Dharma schools which have different theories. The 3 gunas aren't prominent in Buddhist views, for instance, but are still pursuing the same project. Samkhya is foundational for most Hindu schools, though. Some common concepts which are important to all schools. The Vasana Vritti cycle. Ordinarily, we simply forget most of the things we encounter, but some experiences leave a seed, Vasana Samskara, or reinforce existing seeds. This seeds later generate mental activity, Vrittis. Example, facing some insulting remark which later leads to some thoughts, eating something tasty and later getting cravings for that, etc. Vrittis can in turn strengthen vasanas, like eating it again leads to a stronger seed and more cravings later. Some vasanas are much deeper than others and can define a character. The important point here is that by default, we are unaware of the mental seeds driving our activities. It usually takes careful contemplation of some mental phenomena which occurs repeatedly to uncover its source. For instance, maybe one is using the net or smoking, etc., with an internal goal of repeating some positive experience which had left a seed, or maybe the trigger is some difficulty at work which one wants to avoid. This ignorance is avidya, not a lack of information, but nescience, being asleep to what is happening. Then there is the main concept of ahamkara, which is not just pride, but the sense of I am doing X, which is seen as the root of avidya. To see what this means, think of flow states, where some artist or athlete is so concentrated that they feel as if the music is playing by itself. There is no sense of I am playing the piano until maybe the audience claps and interrupts the flow. The point being that this sense of self we impose on top of thoughts/action which happen by themselves is a misperception. Of course, we need identities as a pragmatic tool like we use an ID card, but the issue is that Mohan Aparna aren't just tags. But we get deeply identified and are completely absorbed inside the social narratives built around these tags. He is good and bad, weak, strong, funny, etc. One point I forgot in previous reply, on the point of strength. There is external strength, building muscles, social power, weapons. Acquiring this kind of strength is necessary for upholding dharma, but is also the source of adharma, tyranny, theft, etc. Then strength can also refer to internal strength, ability to function, no matter what obstacle appears. Ananda does lead to internal strength as one doesn't feel despair with the difficulties of life, because there is an internal source which is functioning amidst all external circumstances. 2. Reply, share, use our avatar, level 7 Hindu Bale OP all time, top 500 poster 4-wire. Ago I feel Western individualism is so heavily vested in ahankara. But maybe there's value to it. Their capitalist model wouldn't be workable otherwise. Thanks for the clarification about dukkha and ananda. Are they related to Prakriti and Purusha? The all-time top 10 poster +1 4-yar, ego edited 4-yar. Ago, your questions probably require very long responses. I'll try to make some short points. Being free from a Hamkara sense of agency, working in a flow state, channeling something higher, is not saying that there isn't distinctive personality. A painter can be doing something very different from a poet slash musician slash athlete, even if they are all channeling an inspiration. Or two painters with different styles can be distinct. We observe a very diverse range of yogis corresponding to the diversity among people. Educated slash not educated, teaching in the cultural idioms of this region or that, etc. BTW yogis usually do retain some small amount of ahamkara for practical reasons. One can even make the point that originality, not imitating current social fashions, requires action from some inspired source, which in turn requires to get your ego with its petty concerns out of the way. Ahamkara being as basic to humans as, say, having a hand, probably a lot fewer people who are free from ahamkara compared to people who don't have their hands intact. It will, appropriated by all social systems, just like the hands of humans are used for different purposes. Capitalism, monarchy, socialism, maybe in different ways. For instance, in capitalism, advertisers might sell products using some narratives about changing the status of the self. It is also definitely a big part of Dharma traditions. Praise and blame are allocated to people to move them in directions considered positive. Warriors are shamed when they violate some Dharma, etc. Even in school, we encourage students to study by holding out the promise of prizes and other honors. Of course, the difference here is between using ahamkara pragmatically for a positive change versus affirming it as a basic principle. Christianity also doesn't positively affirm it, as it asks you to follow the divine commandments. Someone like Ayn Rand would be more likely to positively assert the goodness of ahamkara. But what Christianity does is that it accepts a description of agency in terms of free will, which in turn is the root of sin. Augustine once quoted an example as a paradigmatic example of sin. Roughly, as a child, he stole some cookies not because of eating something tasty, but because a parent had told him not to eat the cookies, which brings out an impulse to violate this order. Similarly, humans are seen as using free will to violate God's commandments and falling into sin, whereas Dharma schools say something very different. Imagine someone initially not interested in football, starts following the sport, supports some club, goes to the matches, reads all about the players, becomes strongly identified, has quarrels with fans of other teams, etc. So much so that when the team wins a match, he feels that he has done something great. When a team is mocked after a bad performance, he feels insulted, etc. His self has effectively expanded to include the team. Now, of course, someone can go and tell him, look, what is happening is not your doing, but all these players kicking the ball. Now, exactly the same thing can be said about one's mind. A baby doesn't start with a strong identity. There is an age before they even fail to recognize themselves in the mirror. But as they get old, they receive a name. That name becomes part of a narrative. He, she is good, bad, strong, weak, clever, dull, etc. They become strongly identified with that narrative, even if what is causing their actions is vasana savritis, repetitive mental phenomena moving in the brain and social narrative constructed around that. A stark example of the above constructed nature of self is when people who, using VR goggles, see a simulated body of a character from a distance, and somebody rubs their back in the real world and the back of the virtual character is also rubbed. Then they have an out-of-body experience, feeling that they are outside the body looking at themselves. Metzinger, a philosopher, also gives other examples. Another example, in Indian, probably also Asian languages, one can idiomatically say things like Aj man mi yabarayaki barish an wali hai. Today, the mind got a thought that it will rain. This way of speaking in the third person about the mind isn't idiomatic in English. It is seen as speaking in third person about yourself. The background notion is that of a soul. Balagangadhara makes the point that just because Indians speak English doesn't mean that they understand the concepts which frequently come from a theological background. My childhood thought was that a soul was a cloudy white thing which leaves the body on death. Anyway, the Cartesian soul, in contrast to physical body, are the thoughts and emotions which drive the body. So people are identified with thoughts, emotions. In Sankhya, the thoughts were seen as another layer of the onion, which covers the Purusha, which is the background consciousness in which everything appears. The body is the outermost layer. This gets to your question about Purusha and Prakriti. Thoughts and emotions are part of Prakriti, just like the body and even the chair in front of you. BTW, this doesn't mean Indians are not identified with the mind. They are very much so. Hindu activism today suffers from diagnosing problems as caused by persons good-bad name-calling, etc., whereas what is required is analysis of institutions. But the languages are arranged in a way where one can speak of the mind like an external object like a tree or rain. Hindu activism today suffers from diagnosing problems as caused by persons good-bad, name-calling, etc., whereas what is required is analysis of institutions. Could you please elaborate on this? I was planning to write a post on it later. I'll tag you then. I'm sure you know most of the involved issues, if not see at Pranasutra and at Reality Checkind on Twitter. The thing is why these issues on education and temples are overlooked by Hindus. Hindus are not doing politics, changing the structures to give better outcomes, so much as engaging in psychological conflict, insults, and praise. The other reason is implicitly relying on a theory of change where the government does the actions, expecting Modi or BJP to be the prime mover. The whole process of building media orgs, NGOs, legal teams, etc., which other groups engage in, is mostly overlooked by Hindus, who are primarily caught up in symbolic issues of pride. Importantly, this wasn't how the freedom movement worked. People were actively engaged in starting newspapers, starting new schools, colleges, political organization, etc. I disagree. Ignoring your assumption of a creator already having biased the framework, Nietzsche appears relativist only taken out of context, so yes, misreadings can lead to him becoming popular among pomos. This is for a whole different debate, though, one that I'm not ready for yet. N's project is to respond to the problem of what happens to morality and values after the death of God. The way he frames the question indicates the past framework. Whether we call this relativism or not isn't the point. The creation of gods as an individual positing their own ideal and deriving pleasure from it. I am saying that this process is not accurate, at least not for most people. Sages can create, or more accurately be inspired to create, new divine processes which can mirror normal desires, for instance, romantic or parental love for Krishna. These processes will give the practitioners the goal that they were previously searching for in a mistaken way. Ah, interesting, okay.